Hey guys, Slive here, and welcome back to the Caspian Game Awards. So, we have reached 1998, which, that's kind of weird thinking about that, because, we started this series at the beginning of this year, in January, where we talked about last year's Game Awards. And, I don't know, it's just so weird just how much research I've done just for this series. And which, by the way, I do need to preface this. I forgot to shout out the Game Awards in my 10th anniversary video. So, yeah, I just got caught up talking about just the more recent stuff, like some of the other recent stuff that me and Goldie and Joseph and Sai kind of did over the past 10 years, and that I forgot to talk about the big series of this year for me. And so I do want to preface an apology for that, because this has been a pretty cool series, and weirdly enough, despite the fact that we're kind of getting close to at least the end of this, it will still continue on because, well, if you guys didn't actually know, the 2024 Video Game Awards have already announced their nominations. It'll be happening on December 12th, and I will be doing a live stream where I will be reacting to this alongside other people. And, well, if I'm gonna be honest, I'm not particularly excited about the choices that they have for that. Like, especially for Game of the Year, I really do not, like, I mean, to be fair, 2024 has been kind of a rough year, I feel like, for video games. Of course, once we do our 2024 Game Awards, we'll cover that. But rest assured that I will be covering 2024, and every subsequent year from here on out, we will be doing a Game Award stream of our own so that we can give out the nominees and winners of how I personally feel like the Game Awards should have gotten. Because again, that's how the original series started, and we did that for the, literally the entire 21-year history of the Game Awards, and we'll be doing that for this. We're just doing the ones that didn't have years, so that we can kind of catch the 90s up a little bit here. So, but of course, we're not here to talk about we're not here to talk about 2024. We're here to talk about 1998, which I've got a confession to make about 1998. Like, don't get it wrong, it was definitely a good year for video games. Like, I would definitely say that it's a pretty good year. But I don't think it's quite as good as some people make it out to be. There's all the haters. I'm sorry. It's just, this year I feel like, okay, don't get twisted. The games that were good in 1998 were very good. Like, dare I say, some of the best games of all time came out in 1998. But, like, 98 also just had a lot of games that released that not a lot of people really think about anymore, which is not a bad thing. Don't twist my words here. 1998, I feel like, as far as games, it was a solid year, or at least, like, a very good year, but I do think people rate it a bit too highly. It's kind of like how I feel about 2004, funny enough, where, some of my favorite games of all time came out in 2004, and go watch our 2004 Caspian Game Awards if you guys are interested. But people do rate it a bit too highly, I feel like. Like, there's much better years. But make no mistake, 1998 was pretty good. Like, not amazing, not great. We'll obviously get to the nominees and the winners, but I'm still pretty excited to talk about this year. And, well, it's going to be a pretty interesting one. But of course, before we get into this, let's go over the rules for those who are new to the series, because we did recently get a few new people joining in. Thank you guys. I genuinely appreciate your guys' support. We're literally 1 follower away from our goal. So if you guys can, please hit that follow button if you're watching this on Twitch, because it really means a lot to me. And well, it'll convince me to continue this to finish the 90s if we end up doing that. But we'll only be going up to 95 as of right now. But in any event, let's go over the rules for those who are still new to this series. So, as far as the nominees, it has to be a game that released within that entire frame of the year. Because, well, we're not the Grammys. We don't do weird cutoff dates. We're not the We're not the Game Awards that also do weird cutoff dates because they're omitting Stalker 2 because that game is coming out in 2 days, which is bullshit. It's stupid. Don't do it.
Don't yell at me. Yell at the Grammys.
It's stupid. So we're not like that. We cover the whole year because we're fair and we acknowledge what games came out that said year. And that even includes regional releases. So if a game came out in Japan first, we count the Japanese release. If a game came out in Europe first, we're counting the European release. So if there's a game that came out in 99 in America, but came out in 1988 somewhere else, that's why it's on here. And of course, we are only going to have between 4 to 6 nominees allowed per category so that we're not, having very little as far as representation for a category, but also not bloating a list. So those are just the general nominee there. As far as Game of the Year, these games have to generally be liked by the general consensus of people online, though if absolutely necessary, I'll just start nominating games that I personally liked, though that hasn't been a thing in a while, but that might come up in some of the future streams, so do keep that in mind. And, well, it has to be a completely new game. It cannot be a remake of an older game. So, and, well, truth be told, there's going to be a couple games that are not going to be nominated on here, but it's because I didn't care for them. And because, well, this is a biased stream, I'm only going to be choosing games that I'm personally interested in. So, if you don't like that, well then, that's actually fine. You can comment down below if you want some games. But slight spoiler alert, by the way, before we get into this. This is going to piss some people off, but it's my stream. We are not going to be nominating Fallout 2 or Baldur's Gate on this entire thing. So just go watch any of my tier lists or some of my other streams to understand my Fallout opinion, and watch my 2023 Caspian Game Awards if you want to know why I don't want to touch Baldur's Gate right now because, well, of Pinkerton situations. Literally. So, I know this is back decades before, but this was Wizard of the Coast era by this point for D&D. So I don't want to give a company that sends in mercenaries to people thing. So whatever. You get the point. But don't worry, everything else is up for grabs for 1998. So, and well, that goes with the categories here. So all of our categories have had enough in them. Granted, some of them just barely. So do keep that in mind, is that this is a pretty solid year as far as the categories, but some of them just barely scraped by. So just keep that in the back of your minds as we go through the categories here. But in any event, let's begin, as always, with the best game by a new studio, which, again, keep in mind, especially for a few of these, is that this is not your company's or your studio's first game. It's the first game that got you a lot of attention. And I specify that because a few of the games that I have nominated on here were that technically the studios have been around for a while, but their titles that they released before didn't really have that much success or like that much, hearsay. And so that's why they're going to be nominated here. And truth be told, these are probably the best choices for this category. So let's begin those, shall we? Starting off with Unreal by Epic Games. Yes, Epic Games started in it's weird because this was the first game that got them attention, but they've been around for a while. Yes, I'm well aware of the Jazz Jackrabbit games that they made before this, but those, even for their time, were pretty obscure. This was the game that got Epic their attention. And yes, that is the same Epic Games who would eventually make Unreal Tournament, who would make Gears of War, the video game that's a bane of my existence that I shall not name here. But whether or not you love or despise Epic, Unreal really did set the bar for a lot of things in the first-person shooter category. Like, I played through it last year, and I had a pretty damn good time with it. The fact that it was one of the it was one of the first FPS games to have such a grandiose scale to it. That just wasn't really a thing up until this point. Also, the environmental storytelling that this game provided. The fact that this game had, interconnected levels to where there's no stat screens. You literally just go from point A all the way to the end of the game, and you don't even change perspective ever. That's something that I have to commend, because, well, let's just say a certain game from this year, which we'll get to later, may have gotten a bit too much credit from that. So I'm going to give Unreal the true credit as far as its difference. Also, it's very sad that this game has been kind of swept under the radar by a lot of people. There has been a resurgence of interest with this game, and that makes me happy. But Unreal truly does deserve at least a nod for this. Also, a game that I feel like is a bit more of like a meme nowadays, but if I'm going to be honest, was actually kind of a cool game for its time. I'm going to be honest. Commandos Beyond Enemy Lines is actually a pretty decent little tactics game. Made by Pylo. This was their first game, and it started the Commandos series. But if I'm going to be honest, none of the games really hit the heights that this one did. Which is why I didn't really bring up in the spoiler alert, I didn't bring up in the other games. In some of the other episodes that we've done of the Caspian Game Awards. But this game, it's a World War II game where you play a group of commandos as you go up against German forces. And I don't know, I just find the idea of the type of game that this is, because again, it's a real-time tactics strategy game, which means, your games like XCOM, basically, think those types of games if they were done in real time. And I love XCOM style games, and so to have a game that's that, but in real time, I think it's actually pretty cool. Especially since I'm a bit of a sucker for World War II games to begin with. So, if that piques your interest, go check it out. And again, I think it's good enough to really recommend. Which, well, speaking of tactics, I'm also going to be giving a nominee to Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. So, this is another game that, similar to Unreal, really did change the game as far as shooter games for 1998. Dare I say this is arguably one of the most important games to come out of this year because of the type of game that it was. It was a tactical first-person shooter, which wasn't really a thing at the time. And the fact that this game basically started a lot of the typical first-person shooter mechanics that we take for granted nowadays is completely understated, and it just kind of blows my mind that like this game, similar to Unreal, has just been kind of swept under the radar, especially considering that, you know, well, without this, we wouldn't have Rainbow Six Siege, and people love Rainbow Six Siege. So, but this original game, I highly respect for a lot of the innovations that it led. Red Storm Entertainment, by the way. And then last but not least, we've got ourselves Spyro the Dragon by Insomniac. Again, not their first game, but the first game that really got them a lot of attention. It was not necessarily an extremely revolutionary platformer, but it was definitely a platformer that was different from the typical affair. Being a collectathon as well, there's tons of replay value. And I don't know, it's just a fun game. And, you know, I played it earlier this year. I thought it was pretty fun. So, but of course, those are the nominees that I have for Best Game by New Studio. And, well, you guys know by now, they're in here. So, let's go over the winner. So, again, not too many choices, but I think these are solid choices. And yes, there is one game I am well aware that people are screaming at the top of their lungs is not on here, but I'll get to that later. But let's get this here. So, the award for the best game by a new studio in 1998 goes to Spyro the Dragon. I gotta be honest, this game is a lot of fun. I think that this game easily is up there amongst the greats, not just in the platform sphere, but just video games in general. I mean, the art direction in this game is fantastic. Being a more kid-friendly fantasy sort of game, and really taking advantage of the low polygon count here. Because again, PlayStation 1, you know, this was still pretty early as far as 3D graphics. And so developers were pretty much limited with what they were able to do. And I think that the designs on the original versions of this game, obviously they're dated, because you can tell it's from 1998. But I still think they're actually pretty iconic, which they would obviously be translated pretty well with the remaster, with the Reignited Trilogy, but we're not talking about the Reignited Trilogy, we're talking about original Spyro here. I think all of that translates pretty well as far as being a more kid-friendly option, especially considering that the PlayStation 1 just didn't really have too many of those. To have something appeal to pretty much everyone was a win-win in all categories. And of course, music slaps in this game. Insomniac, even as early as the original Spyro game, showed that they have some damn good sound design and some fantastic music going on around. And even a lot of the levels here are pretty iconic. I mean, you know, the beginning area, pretty iconic in its own way. It's seen in every single Spyro game. So of course, I feel like as far as the best game by a new studio, oddly enough, this is the one I would choose. So, and you know, it's a little dude. It's Spyro. He's a little purple dragon boy. You can't go any wrong with that, right? So, yeah. But now let's move on to the action-adventure category, which, for those who don't know, it's not just action-adventure games. We include straight-up action games, straight-up adventure games, and even horror games, because there's not really enough horror games to kind of have its own category, nor do I want it to have its own category. So this is just kind of the general, you know, all the types of games that you can think of on here. And, well, this is where I start saying that, like, you know, 1998, I mean, we already kind of saw that with Best Game by a New Studio. But this is where we start really getting into the games that were really damn good this year. Because, look at this. Look at that. I mean, the screen shows it all. So, again, 1998, when it was good, it was really damn good. So let's talk about that. So, first of all, Resident Evil 2. Arguably one of the most iconic survival horror games ever made. And pretty much solidify Resident Evil as a household name for the rest of time. Has it aged in some ways? Yes, that's why the remake exists. But I have to be honest with myself, Resident Evil 2 is a very important game in the survival horror category. I mean, it's funny because like Resident Evil 2, well, yes, it did make some significant changes from the previous game. It really isn't that different from Resident Evil 1. But I think just the fact that this game had a bit more of a memorable cast and a much more memorable setting, I think really does skyrocket this game a bit more in a lot of people's minds. And again, I gotta be honest with you guys. Even though this is not the type of survival horror that I'm personally interested in, I have to put my bias aside and say that Resident Evil 2 definitely deserves to be nominated here, without a question. And, well, another game that was a pretty big game changer for 1998 that deserves a nod here. Metal Gear Solid. I mean, I played the game last year for the very first time, and I loved it. Like, it was... I can easily see why people consider this to be one of the greatest games of all time. Because of its cinematography that... Honestly, this game kind of pioneered in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, there were definitely some games that did stuff similar to it beforehand, but this was definitely, like, one of the first games that felt like you were actually playing in a movie. And... yeah, I gotta give credit to Hideo Kojima and the rest of his team on this. Like, goddamn, they deliver in a lot of ways here. So, of course it's gonna get a nod. But, you know, let's like, kind of lower it down a little bit, and let's talk about... Let's go medieval. Like, let's not necessarily, like, go so high as far as, like, you know, game influence, and let's just talk about a game that is admittedly kind of pretty fun. The original Medieval came out this year, also for the PlayStation 1, which, by the way, you can probably tell there's a little bit of a PS1 bias here. I am well aware, but I mean, that damn console was pretty fun in a lot of ways. It was one of my first consoles, so, or at least the games themselves were. So, but even just kind of putting that aside, I do think people generally consider these to be fantastic games. And Medieval, you know, was definitely a bit more of a... I don't want to call it silly. It's definitely one of those games that it didn't take itself super, super seriously. It was more spooky fun than it was like a horror game. And I kind of like that. It is a shame that Medieval just kind of never really went anywhere after this and the sequel. But it is still a game that I'd argue has its place. If you want a hack, like an early hack and slash game that was a bit more I don't want to say lighthearted, but a bit more didn't take itself super seriously. This is one of the earliest examples I can point to that was pretty decent for its time. So, and, well, admittedly, in hindsight, was kind of a more kid-friendly version of another PlayStation 1 game that I will be talking about in our next episode, so stay tuned for that. So, yeah, Medieval, it's pretty cool. And then we got Tomb Raider 3, which, well, took Lara Croft to the United States, as you can clearly tell by the cover back there. It just, again, it's just another solid game within the Tomb Raider series. They perfected the formula in the previous game, and so naturally, Tomb Raider 3 would continue off of that. And, I mean, if I'm going to be honest, that's all I gotta really say. It's just another solid Tomb Raider game from what many people consider to be the golden age of Tomb Raider. And, you know, just kicking a lot of ass. That's all I gotta really say. Then we've got the big kahuna itself. The Legend of Zelda, the Ocarina of Time. So, this game, at least on websites like Metacritic, is considered to be the best game of all time. Mostly because of its environment, its gameplay, and its general sense of charm, amongst many other things. Okay, it is a good game. And if I'm gonna be honest, and this might be surprising to hear from me, because you guys know how much I hate the N64, I think the controller sucks. Honestly, this is probably the best N64 game ever of all time. Do I consider it to be the best game of all time, though? Maybe not necessarily, but it's still a pretty damn good Zelda game for what it is. Even if it's on hardware that's not particularly my favorite, I recognize that this game means a lot to people and is actually pretty damn good in a lot of ways. It's just aged a little bit in some ways. That does not take away from how damn good of a game it is, though. So, I'm still gonna nominate here. But, well, we've got another game here representing the stealth category. Because, well, Metal Gear Solid was not the only stealth game that really defined the genre this year. Because this was also the year of the original Thief, The Dark Project. Which, funny enough, is a game that I also streamed actually around this time 4 years ago, back in 2020. Admittedly, I stopped because it's a long game. Trust me, this game is long, but it is a fun game regardless. First person sneaking around, using different arrow types for your being able to traverse around, as well as taking out lights, and obviously using it as offense against guards. Using your stealth attacks to knock out guards without having to kill them, try and hide bodies. It's honestly pretty fun. It does require a lot of patience to play it, and there's definitely some sucky parts to it, but I would argue that Thief the Dark Project is definitely worth your time, and it definitely deserves to have a nomination here for Best Action Adventure Game of 1998. It's a lot of fun. Funny enough, this is the only PC exclusive game on here. Some of these other games have been released on PC. It's just kind of funny. This is the only one. But yeah, I think that's all I gotta really say. Let's go over the winner. Oh yeah, sorry, I was checking something. But yeah, let's go over the winner. So here we go. So, the award for the best action adventure game of 1998 goes to Resident Evil 2. This game really did make survival horror pretty damn popular. Yes, the original game existed before this, but this game did a lot of improvements compared to the original. First of all, the atmosphere and the location. Where Resident Evil 1 took place in a, spooky mansion, it was a spooky mansion. That's kind of a typical, horror trope. So, and while, yes, there were definitely some creepy things that popped up in the original Resident Evil, again, a lot of them were kind of tropey. You know, had your zombies, your giant spiders, your giant snakes. You know, it was just kind of a lot of your typical sort of monsters. But Resident Evil 2 decided to take a more unconventional location, because this game takes place in a police station, which not very common as far as horror games are concerned. Hell, that's still not common. Like, you know, like a prison, or maybe prisons, probably, like jail, like haunted jails, but like just a straight up police station. No. And they did it pretty damn well, especially considering that this game, I feel like, has a bit more of a dingier and more creepy atmosphere because you're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. But they made the zombie apocalypse creepy, almost as if they were paying homage to some of the early zombie films like Night of the Living Dead, which, well, is admittedly kind of creepy for today's standards. Like, as far creepy as far as, like, you know, being the good type of creepy. And yeah, Resident Evil 2 was able to deliver on that. And, you know, this game also had some slight tweaks to the gameplay. Like, your movement was a bit faster than it was in the first game. Being able to swap between items was a bit more streamlined. Like, it was more small quality of like tweaks that they did that really do make the experience a lot more enjoyable. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of the fixed cameras in these older Resident Evil games, but having stuff like that really does make this a lot more tolerable for me personally. Also, well, this game does have 2 separate campaigns, and unlike the first game, they were both more meaningful and actually a lot more enjoyable to play, because if you try playing as Chris Redfield in the original Resident Evil, you're not going to have a good time compared to playing as Jill Valentine. I'm just going to be frank. You can play as Leon Kennedy, just pretty fine, as well as, I forgot her name, I feel so bad. Claire Redfield. Yeah, Chris Redfield's. Yeah. Which, well, that gets us into the cast of characters. Leon Kennedy, Claire Redfield, Ada Wong, and of course, the notorious Mr. X that follows you throughout the entire game. Granted, you can knock him out in this version. In the remake, you know, he just follows you all around. You can actually knock him out in this. But that does not take away from how much of an intimidating threat he is throughout the entire game. And, well, he's kind of a creepy motherfucker, you know? Like, he's definitely the type of threat that, honestly, really does add to the atmosphere here. It makes it to where you're not safe. And I like that. I like having that sense of, when is this guy gonna come back? And I think this was definitely the first game that really popularized that sort of boogeyman threat that a lot of survival horror games do nowadays. And so, yeah, no, Resident Evil easily deserves the win here, at least in my personal opinion. It may not be my favorite type of Resident Evil, but that's not going to take away from the fact that this game is pretty damn good. So, if you guys haven't, see if you can check out the original Resident Evil 2. If not, the remake is a fantastic retelling of this game. So, even if the gameplay is very different, but you know how it goes. Alright, let's go away from the more mature games. Let's go more lighthearted. Let's go platformer. So, of course, this is the era of the 3D platformer, and so those types of games were definitely really peaking around this time. I will admit there were a lot of mascot platformers that were around that haven't particularly aged the best, but there were some that, well, still hold up to this day. And let's go over those. Some of these you guys may or may not make fun of me for, but I think those are solid choices. So, of course, Spyro the Dragon, we're going to nominate it. Fair game. This first game here, though, I know people are going to make fun of me. Because, well, yeah, but Gex, again, he's kind of more of a meme nowadays for just being kind of that, late 90s platformer that was originally a 3DO game, but then got ported over to the PlayStation 1. That he's seen as like a failed 3DO mascot, and because of that, he's not as well respected. But I'm not gonna lie, the Gex 2 and even Gex 3, I think are actually kind of fun. Like, it's not. I mean, here, to put it this way, it's a game that knows that it's stupid. Like, it's a game that's pretty dumb, but it knows that it's dumb, and I like that. It's a game that definitely doesn't take itself super, super seriously. I mean, most platformers shouldn't really do that, unless if you are a cinematic platformer, which, of course, we'll get to in a little bit. But, yeah, no, Gex is definitely the type of game that it's a certain appeal, I will admit, but it's an appeal that at least I can understand. So I think it's at least worth something? I don't know. You guys be the judge of that if you guys can. Which, well, then gets us into another cinematic, a cinematic platformer. Heart of Darkness. So again, this was a PlayStation 1 exclusive game. And, well, this game's kind of messed up in a lot of ways. I mean, you got that shadow following you the entire game, so that's always creepy. But again, as far as like this style of platformer, if you want a game that is a bit more on the realistic looking side, that tells a bit of a compelling story of trying to be able to overcome your fears, Heart of Darkness is definitely a game that I would recommend on that basis. And I mean, hell, if you like the older Prince of Persia games, and I mean like the older Prince of Persia games, you're most likely going to like this game. Especially if you want something that's a bit more interpersonal. Let's go to the complete opposite and let's talk about this boy, Crash Bandicoot. So, yep, Crash Bandicoot Warped is getting nominated here. Which is weird because it's funny because Crash hasn't really always been my favorite, sort of platformer series. I've always much gravitated towards Spyro personally, but if I'm gonna be honest, Crash Warped is, at least in my personal opinion, at least from the PlayStation 1 era, easily the best Crash game. No contest. Like, it has, the most variety. It has the best locales. It has basically everything that you want your game to have been improved upon. And making it a lot more forgiving compared to the first two Crash games, which I found to be a bit too annoying for my personal taste. So Crash Bandicoot Warped, I think, is pretty fun. And, well, it introduced us to Uka Uka, so that's always fun. Uka Uka mad. I'm sorry. Uka Uka's cool, and don't worry, I still like Aku Aku. He's pretty great as well. they actually gave him a bit of a personality in this game too, so that's always nice. But yeah, Crash Warped, pretty damn good. And that gets us into the last nominee, Oddworld Apes Exodus. Funny enough, this game, the company treats this game more as an expansion pack to the original game, but it's really not. It is more of its own like game. It has enough distinctions to where like, because they don't really count it as like a mainline game. They treat it as a spin-off. But it's still an important game within the Oddworld universe. And, well, this game, it's hard as fuck, but it's still pretty fun in a lot of ways. And that sort of grim, dark, very, anti-capitalist messaging that this game invokes really does give this a higher edge. I mean, the Oddworld games have always been pretty damn good with their atmosphere. All of them have been good with that, and this game is no exception. And if you want something that is definitely more on the mature side and is more, well, a huge criticism, like basically a very telling and critical game on corporate greed and the issues that something like a late stage capitalism, like capitalist society, can invoke. Oddworld is actually a very good political commentary in that regard. And shit, this predates BioShock by 9 years as far as a game that directly criticized that sort of stuff. So easily a game that I can recommend. So, what's the winner? Well, the winner's going to surprise you guys, because you guys probably wouldn't have thought I would have given this the win, but, well, I guess that kind of showcases just how much I've changed as a person. So, let's do it. So, the award for the best platformer of 1998 goes to Crash Bandicoot Warped. Yeah, I've accepted that this is easily the best out of the games that is on here. And, well, in my opinion, it's easily the best Crash Bandicoot game. But why is this game as good as it is? Well, I mean, I already mentioned it earlier. This game, it feels easier to control, but it's not because Crash himself controls any different compared to the previous games, because he still controls just like he did in the first 2 games. But it's the way in which the levels were designed is what makes him a lot more tolerable to control in this game. They've widened the levels a bit more, and they offer a lot more opened up levels for you to be able to walk around. And I like that sense of freedom. It makes it where you're not just in this linear corridor like a bunch of the other games are in, and allows for a much more user-friendly experience. And I like that. I like having the ability to have the option to move around in a much more open area, especially as someone who can kind of get annoyed by some of the more frustrating parts with Crash as a series. And, well, of course, the level variety, I think, is fantastic in this game. There's tons of vehicle sections that don't overstay their welcome and are still pretty fun. They still have the chasing levels. They still have they have basically the opposite of that, where you're running like towards the thing. They've been in previous Crash Bandicoot games before, but you guys know what I'm talking about, where you're on like an animal. Those sections are pretty fun as well. The bosses are surprisingly pretty fun in this game. And, well, this would have been a great conclusion to a trilogy, but we all know the history of Crash post Crash 3. It wasn't the greatest, if I'm going to be honest. But those first 3 games, we at least still hold a lot. I at least respect. And the 3rd game in that trilogy, I am going to crown as the best Crash game of all time. So, good job, Crash Banuka. You won it. So, okay, I'm sorry. I'm quoting Kid Icarus too much. I'm sorry. All right, role-playing games. So, I mean, I already spoiled it. I'm not going to be nominating Fallout 2 or Baldur's Gate here. And admittedly, because of that, 1998, and granted, 1999 had the same problem as well. This was just kind of a late 90s issue. It just wasn't really the greatest era for RPGs. I mean, the games that came out here, and the ones that we're going to be nominating here, I think they're fine. Like, they're just okay. I'm not going to pretend to be like, oh, these games are fantastic. They're just fine. Like, decent. I think it's just due to the fact that, like, the technological shift between the 2D RPGs to the 3D ones was a bit more jarring for a lot of companies, and because of that, RPGs from this time period just weren't, either they weren't well received, or they just weren't as remembered as a lot of the games that came up before or even after this. This is just kind of a weird limbo period for RPGs. Make no mistake, though, there's some pretty decent games that came out in 1998. So, but if I'm going to be honest, these are the only 6 games that at least somewhat qualify. So, and, well, the average Joe Schmo is not going to really know these. But we're going to at least give them due diligence. And I'm pretty sure the only non-JRPG is Might and Magic, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, first of all, Xenogears. So this is, funny enough, for those who don't know, the beginning of the Xeno franchise, which, yes, if you guys know anything about that, also includes the Xenoblade games, Xenoblade Chronicles. Yes, they are a sub-franchise within the overarching Xeno franchise, and this was the beginning of that. Granted, this is a vastly different game compared to the Xenoblade games. So don't expect to go around beating people with like giant swords. This one, funny enough, it's in the name. Gears. It's a lot more mech based. Or at least it has some vehicular combat sections, which was a pretty interesting concept at the time. Not many game RPGs had that. So that's a big plus. And I feel like this game is more remembered for its narrative than anything else. So if you want a bit more of an introspective story, Xenogears has got you covered. And then, well, we've got ourselves a game that, again, I will admit, nowadays, it's more of a meme than it is anything else. But we've got ourselves Square Enix's Parasite Eve. And no, we're not talking about the stupid Bring Me the Horizon song. So, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I hate that song. The Parasite Eve. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm one of those people who did not like the Post-Human EP. That EP was bad. I still stand by that 3 years after I made that statement. I'm hoping Bring Me the Horizon fans are not going to fucking get pissed at that, but whatever. But funny enough, the name of that song, yes, that song name came from this game. Yes, this is where that song name came from. Parasite Eve was originally a horror RPG. Yes, this is a survival horror RPG hybrid game, which is interesting. This game has some whack-ass cutscenes, by the way. Again, this game is more so carried by its more interesting gameplay mechanic, because it's real-time battles, but it's still randomized combat, which I think is fine. It's decent. And being like a bit more of a, you're basically, a detective trying to uncover this sort of interdimensional thing going on, and you got like demons coming out. Like it's interesting. It was a bit of an experiment for the time that Square Enix, or Square at the time, they weren't unified yet. What Square made, it's decent. I'm not gonna pretend it was amazing though. It was just fine. It is definitely a product of its time though, so do keep that in mind. Which, well, brings us to Might and Magic 6. So, of course, this continued on the old legacy of the Might and Magic games. And, again, if I mentioned this in the previous episode, if you like something that was basically just a more westernized version of something like a Final Fantasy or a Dragon Quest, Might and Magic got you covered. So that's all I really gotta say. And then we got Brave Fencer Musashi. Brave Fencer Musashi. So I'm sorry, I need to stop quoting Kadikarus. I'm sorry. It's this year is what I'm gonna call the Kadikarus year. So, because I feel like a lot of games he's talked about are gonna be mentioned here now. But anyways, Brave Fencer Musashi is a action RPG. So if you want more real-time combat, well, here you go. This, I think, was actually one of the earliest examples of an action RPG hack and slash hybrid. So I will give it credit. Pretty much a pioneer in that respect. And, well, for a game that was from around this time, it's decent, but it's not the most memorable game. Again, you see what I mean, is that this year in general was just kind of everyone was just kind of comfortable with the RPGs that were coming out. So, and, well, Star Ocean, the second story, and Suikoden 2, kind of the same thing. Suikoden 2 being a more traditional JRPG, and Star Ocean, if I remember correctly, this was on... Wasn't this on the Sega Saturn? Like, this was one of the last games that was on... I think, right? No, this was still on PlayStation. Yes, this is an Enix game. So, okay, this was an action RPG. Excuse my language. More on the like, it's more on like a... It's a fusion of fantasy and sci-fi, so it's got different like worlds that are more fantastical based, but they have sci-fi technology. That's kind of what Star Ocean is. So if that's so if you basically want to see knights with laser guns, there you go. I mean, insert 40k joke here, but you get the point. Is I'm not going to pretend that these games are like, revolutionary. So do keep that in mind. And I know people are going to be like, well, then you should have nominated Baldur's Gate and you should have nominated Fallout 2. Okay, but you're talking to someone who doesn't like Fallout. So I wouldn't have cared to begin with. And frankly, with Baldur's Gate, again, even though this was before the whole Pinkerton situation, this was still Wizards of the Coast when they bought out the Dungeons and Dragons license, which is what Baldur's Gate is under. I don't feel comfortable supporting that sort of mentality of, especially companies basically doing just straight up criminal acts like that. So, granted, I know it's not BioWare's fault, because yes, that was in fact BioWare's first major game. That is not BioWare's fault. It's just, I don't know. So it's just not really the thing. I just don't feel comfortable supporting something like that. So, I mean, again, even if we did nominate it, it wouldn't have really mattered anyways. Because, again, this year still would have just been kind of a whatever year for RPGs. So, but regardless, let's go over the winner. So, the award for the best role-playing game of 1998, at least in my opinion right now, goes to Xenogear. Out of all the games that we nominated, this is the one that I've heard the most consistent about good things about it. And not only that, but I mean, it spawned the Xenoblade Chronicles series. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to give it credit where credit is due in that respect. So again, it wasn't the most innovative RPG, but it still had some pretty notable things. Of course, it had a bit more of an interpersonal narrative where the characters a lot more closely tied together. It honestly has a lot of motifs similar to that of Final Fantasy 6 and 7, funny enough, which this game was clearly inspired by both of those. And I think that's pretty respectable. This game also, being a typical JRPG, has a pretty decent combat system. You know, just taking a lot of the inspiration from a lot of other RPGs of the time, just applying best aspects of those. But what made this game at least stand out at the time was its sense of scale. This was, I think, the first fully 3D RPG for consoles, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that, but if it wasn't, it's at least one of the first. And I gotta give props to that. There weren't a lot of RPGs that were really doing that at the time on console. And because of that, it allowed for a bigger sense of scale compared to even Final Fantasy VII. Because that game still was not fully 3D. It used 3D political models on 2D backgrounds. This game was fully in 3D. And it allows for a much more sense of what exactly you're going up against. And I think that ultimately puts this game, you know, it edges the competition out. And if I'm going to be honest, and this might piss some people off even more, even if I did have Baldur's Gate on here as a nominee, I still probably would choose Xenogears because of that. Just on principle. So, because I think that's a much bigger innovation than what Baldur's Gate was doing. So, you can take it or leave it. Which then, well, speaking of games that are very contentious with the channel, we got the best shooter category. So, there's one game that we did not have in the best game by a new studio that I know people are screaming at the top of their lungs was not nominated there. Well, okay, we'll get to that in a second. But the reason why I don't consider that to be the best is because there were a lot of other games that came out this year that we obviously also talked about that I feel like innovated the shooter genre a lot more. So, that being said, funny enough, the game in question that I'm talking about, this might surprise you guys. I'm still gonna nominate it. Yes. Yes. You see it on your screens, but we'll get to that as the last thing we talk about. So first of all, Unreal in Rainbow Six, I am nominating on here as well. So Unreal, of course, for the reasons I said before about its way in which it, you know, had its gameplay and its grand scale, and Rainbow Six for the innovations that it had for just the shooter genre as a whole. But let's talk about some of these other games first. So first of all, Shogo Mobile Armored Division. This is a mech-based first-person shooter that was released by Monolith. Excuse me. And funny enough, you don't actually feel this being a mech combat game. It still feels like a typical first-person shooter from the time. And I think that is pretty cool in a lot of ways. This game never got a sequel, which is a damn shame, and well, I'm gonna be frank, that is an even bigger shame because, well, this was definitely the better of the two projects that they released that year. God, Blood 2 sucks ass. Oh my god. But Shogo was definitely a cool homage to Japanese mecha, and I think that is respectable that they paid homage to like a lot of those 80s and 90s mecha anime that were pretty popular. And just as a bit of a way to introduce Western audiences to that through a medium like video games. I think that's actually pretty cool. And then we got Sin, which I have since played since our very first, or since the first FPS tier list that we've done. And this game was kind of cool. It is a game that I will admit does, it plays it a bit too straight, and because of that, it makes things pretty hilarious at points. But it is a game that I think is pretty enjoyable. It slowed down the pace a bit compared to a lot of other games that came out at the time. It had a bit of it had a lot of narrative beats that I can at least give a lot of credit to. And I mean, John Blade being actually kind of an unironic badass. Like, he's actually kind of an underrated hero. I would have put him on our heroes tier list if he was a more popular character, but he's actually kind of a cool, rogue cop sort of character, which I know that's a trope, but keep in mind this was 1998, so that was still kind of a new trope. Okay, I guess not really rogue cop, but whatever. And I don't know, just the fact that this game was it took a bit more time for you to go through each area, I think is what really does, at least in my opinion, make it stand out. And well, we'll get to the game in question that I've been dodging in a second, but I think that's respectable. And then we got Turok 2, which is the sequel to 1997's Turok. It's another Quake clone that I thought was pretty decent. I think they made the protagonist way much of a better representative of Native American, people for Native American people, because I don't know how I feel about the original version, but that's the point. This game takes place mostly in an urban environment, but with a bunch of mutant humanoid reptiles as well as actual dinosaurs that you have to go up against, and I think that's pretty cool. And again, this was originally released on the N64, and while yeah, it's kind of awkward to control, it's honestly the best they could have done for the time. Funny enough, I actually prefer the most recently released PC version of this game, but it's still a game that, if you want to play an old school retro shooter, it's a game that I can still at least say it's decent. Go check it out. Half-Life 1 is on here too. Okay. if you guys know the history of this channel, you guys know that I am probably the biggest critic that this game has ever had. But it's not because I hate the game. I used to hate this game. I don't hate it anymore. As a matter of fact, I respect the game. I just think that it is overrated in a lot of ways. And for those who are new to the channel, let me explain myself. People really do overstate the innovations, like really do overstate how innovative this game was. Especially when you compare it to games that you see on your screen right now that I feel like were basically did a lot of the stuff that Half-Life 1 did, but not only did it in some ways better, but well, more importantly, did it before Half-Life 1. So that is admittedly my annoyance, is that people treat this as if you can't criticize it, that it's a perfect 10 out of 10 game, and that it was the most important first-person shooter ever made, when it's like, no, it's not. And, well, truth be told, it is a game that I can criticize, because even Half-Life 1 fans recognize it's not a perfect game. Just the Zen sections in the final, like, hour or hour half of the game, terrible. It sucks ass. And if I'm gonna be honest, the game from Surface Tension onwards is where it really goes downhill. Like, once you go outside, that's where the game kind of starts failing. I also have some other, criticisms. The fact that the registration can sometimes not work. The amount of glitches on that were on the Steam release version for the longest time, which thankfully they patched out in the 25th anniversary version. That's nice. But just the fact that, like, those have been an issue, and just the fact that people treat this as if this is the best shooter game of all time. I'm sorry, I can't. I like Half-Life as a universe. I like Half-Life as, a piece of science fiction and gaming history. But, well, spoiler alert, it's not going to win the best shooter game nomination. It's just not. But I am still going to give it a nod because it is a game that I like. It's not the best game of all time, though. The stuff that people say that Half-Life 1 did, Rainbow Six, Unreal, Sin, they did it before Half-Life 1. And that's my point. So, but yeah, let's go over the winner. So I already know I pissed a lot of people off with that statement, but I'm just being straight up. It's a good game. It's decent. It has a cool, has some cool world building. That's it, though. So, again, whatever. So, let's go over the winner. So, here we go. So, the award for the best shooter game of 1998 goes to Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. This game, at least in my opinion, is the game that really, really innovated in a lot of ways. But let's talk about those innovations. So, first of all, why do I say that this game innovated first-person shooters? Well, okay, well, let's talk about, some of the bullet points here. So, first of all, this game was one of the first games that had a bit more of a had more realistic locales. You were in a bunch of office buildings, you were in people's houses, you went on a bunch of different big vehicles, to do certain missions. There were a lot more open fields in this game. You were in a lot of factories. Like, this game had architectural level design that, well, mimicked that of real life places. And, well, that's something that I can respect, because it allowed for a more grounded experience compared to other games that came out before then. And, well, with that realism added in a lot of more realistic weaponry and arsenals here. This wasn't the first game to have guns based off of real-life weapons. I mean, hell, the original Doom, the pistol, it's literally just an M9. And I'm pretty sure even the weapons from Wolfenstein 3D, you're carrying, I think it's like a Luger, and then I think it's an MP40. I don't know, the sprites are kind of hard to tell in that game. I know they show the full body of the gun on the bottom of the screen for Wolfenstein 3D, but you get my point. So this game was definitely a game that took that in an even further direction, where you got stuff like MP5s and like M16s. Like, it gave you a more realistic arsenal, and I like that. And that adds to the immersion. And, well, it being a tactical shooter, one of the first of its kind, it's a very hard game, but it's not punishing. It's not brutally punishing compared to other games that it could have. It's not as punishing as you would think, especially since you can actually plan out your attacks with multiple squad mates for you to be able to get the job done in an efficient manner. And I think that's pretty cool. Which, of course, one of the innovations, working with a squad. That just wasn't a thing before then. This was one of the first games to have it to where you had AI teammates. And that's awesome. And, well, this is the most important reason why I do consider this to be a much more innovative game than Half-Life 1. Not only was this the beginning of tactical shooters, but if I'm going to be honest, the mechanics in this game more so mimic a lot of mechanics that we see in modern shooters nowadays than Half-Life 1. Whereas Half-Life 1, it had some more it had some more realistic level design, and you had to reload some of your weapons. It had some real-life weapons that you could use in that game, like the Glock and the MP5. It's still just a Quake clone. I mean, you can literally play the game like Quake, and you would be able to beat the game. I did it on stream. I can do it. Like, some people might try to play it a bit slower, but you're not supposed to. So, but with a game like Rainbow Six, well, the game modified the mechanics to where you kind of have to play it a bit more slow. And it's thanks to things like, well, aforementioned reloads, but also changing, like swapping between different fire modes, so you can switch, like some of the weapons allow you to switch between single fire, burst fire, or full auto. There's actually a working crosshair, which changes depending on how much you move. Again, a pretty big part of FPS games nowadays. The fact that you're only limited to 2 weapons per character here, which that is just a normal thing in first-person shooters. Half-Life 1, you still have the entire arsenal of weapons at your disposal. This game restricts you to 2. That's an extremely common thing in first-person shooters nowadays. And, well, considering that this was a modern military shooter, it really was sort of the beginning of military shooters that became extremely common in the latter half of the 2000s, going into the early 2010s. And I'd argue that it helped inspire some games like Medal of Honor, where that game basically kind of bridged the gap between the more arcadey shooters and tactical shooters like this. So that's why in my opinion, this is the true game to really innovate for first-person shooters. Half-Life 1 was just kind of more of culmination of both this and Unreal's ideas. So, not to disrespect Valve, it's just stop putting that game on a pedestal. Like, I'm so fucking sick and tired of it. So, that's not to say that I dislike that game though, because it's still a decent game. It's just I think Rainbow Six is the game that deserves this. Like, deserves the win for best shooter game. So, I hope you guys at least understand my reasonings. Which, let's move on from that. Let's talk about the best sim strategy. So, of course, this includes all of your typical, like, strategy game types. So, turn-based, real-time, grand, and simulation, of course, all the above. So, this year, again, another year that, for, like, sim strategy that I feel like was fine. So obviously Commandos Beyond Enemy Lines we're still going to nominate because it being a real-time tactics game I think is pretty cool. But I, of course, am going to be nominating, well, probably one of the biggest games to actually come out this year. The original StarCraft. So, I mean, it's StarCraft. Need I say more? It was originally, funny enough, supposed to be a 40k game, but, well, after the whole Warcraft licensing debacle that happened in 94, Blizzard was like, no, we're going to make our own IP out of this. And, well, the rest is history. Easily one of the most iconic RTS games of all time, and for good reason. So, of course, I had to nominate it. But what about some of the other games? Well, 1998 was also the debut of the Anno series. Anno 1602 came out this year. And, well, it was a pretty decent little city builder, which was one of the first to go up against what SimCity was doing, but being set in a more historical time period, making it stand out. Since this game was more inspired by the early English settlements of the eastern United States at the time. Well, obviously not the United States back then, but you guys know what I mean. Like the early colonies of the New World, per se. Which, yeah, you can definitely say has certain implications, but I would argue at least was done in good faith. And, like I said, was a game that really did successfully compete against SimCity. Especially since it took them a while to release SimCity 3000. So this kind of helped fill the void a little bit. So if you guys want to, I'd recommend you guys check it out. And then we got Descent, Free Space, The Great War, which, yes, is a part of the Descent series, but is a spin-off, which eventually became its own series. It's a flight simulator, like a space flight combat simulator, that it's pretty decent. Definitely taking a lot of inspiration from the Wing Commander series, for sure. But if you want something that is a bit more freeform, Descent is a decent series to go with that. And we got Railroad Tycoon 2, which came out 8 years after the original. Damn. And, well, if you guys didn't know, this is technically a Sid Meier game. Yes. Because the original game was called Sid Meier's Railroad Tycoon. They just dropped his name after the sequel here. And, I mean, it's kind of funny because this game's on this, like, the first two Tropico games would eventually be on the same engine that this is on. So I don't know. I just kind of find that to be a fun fact. But as far as being a business simulator for managing the railroad and managing railroad trade, I think this is actually a pretty decent edutainment type of game in that respect. It is definitely a game that you need to take a lot of time and research for, especially if you want to know how to actually play the game properly. But if you want to have a more, in-depth simulation of running a railroad company, Railroad Tycoon 2 is actually not that bad. Just prepare for a lot of, math. Just to put it bluntly. You're gonna have to learn how to count some stuff, that's for sure. And, well, that then gets us into Myth 2 Soul Blighter, which, this one's pretty funny, because this is the sequel to Myth, which was made by a little company that made a certain science fiction game a few years later. You might know it. They're called, I don't know, Bungie? Yes. Okay, I don't know if this game was actually made by Bungie. I think this game was made by a different company, but the original Myth, I know for a fact, was made by Bungie. So, was Myth 2 also made by Bungie? Yes. Yes, it was. It was also made by Bungie. This is also a real-time tactics game, just more on the fantasy side. So, it's a lot more sword-based combat as opposed to shooting. And yeah, as far as that's concerned, it's pretty decent. So that's pretty I don't know, it's just pretty funny that this is made by Bungie, because this is so different compared to Halo, Destiny, and even Marathon. I mean, to be fair, they also made Oni, but it is what it is. So again, not the greatest year for the sim strategy. I think it's pretty obvious what the winner is here, so I'm not even going to waste time. So I just wanted to at least give a nod to some other games. But, well, let's be real here. The award for the best sim strategy game of 1998, without a doubt, goes to StarCraft. It's not even a contest. This game, it's the only real choice for 1998. I hate saying that, because no disrespect to any of the other games that we nominated. It's just, this was a cultural landslide. Oh my god, it's not even close. I mean, but why? Why was this game considered such? Well, first of all, this game had a bit of a cool atmosphere to it. Obviously, being an X40K game that became its own franchise, it took a lot of influence from that. I mean, the Protoss are clearly supposed to be based off of some of the Chaos Demons. The Terran Empire, obviously supposed to be the Imperium of Man. And then I forgot what the bugs were called from StarCraft. What are they called again? The Zerg. Tyranids. So, obviously the game, you could tell where they got their influence from. But even kind of despite all of that, this game was able to produce its own pretty cool sci-fi atmosphere that not a lot of RTS games really took advantage of. This game definitely took its time to craft its maps to be a lot more immersive compared to a lot of RTS games at the time. And I gotta be honest, that was pretty cool seeing. It's also helped that this game has a lot of, faction, a lot of the three factions that you got, the Protoss, Zerg, and Terran Empire. They all are pretty balanced between each other. There's not one faction that overtakes the other. And that's Well, I gotta respect that. But also, funny enough, this was amongst one of the first games in the strategy genre to have a fully fleshed out narrative. Like, it has its own campaign. And that was a pretty big deal, because strategy games never really had too many justifications for those, except for one. I think Command and Conquer was definitely the exception to that rule. But this was definitely the game that not only said it was okay. No. Command and Conquer was the game that said it was okay to have a story in your RTS, but this was definitely the game that stretched it out and accepted that, if that makes any sense. And I think that's something that is worth noting. So, yeah, StarCraft, easily the winner. I don't think it's I don't think that's any controversy there. All right, sports, racing, fighting. I'm not gonna lie, we're starting to get away from the era in which I personally like a lot of this category. Not to say that games from before this or even after that were completely terrible as far as sports and racing games. It's just, this might be a category that I might have to take away the further and further we get away from the modern era. Like the more we get into the 90s, it might be a bit hard for me to justify this category. Not to say that it's completely impossible to justify. It's just, it's gonna be a lot thinner. I mean, it kind of already has been, but I had to really dig deep to try to find something here. So what did I end up choosing? Well, Bushido Blade 2, a fighting game that is a lot more weapon-based combat, which is something that I preferred. Is it as good as the first Bushido Blade? No, but I still think that it is a decent little experience from the PlayStation 1 that, I mean, if you like more of that style of fighting game, I'd say that's a decent enough of a choice, right? That's just me personally. But, well, this was also the year that brought us Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, which was the first Need for Speed game to really emphasize the cop chases. I think they were technically a thing in 2, but they weren't the main focus. They made that the main focus for this game. And I think it makes the game a lot of fun, even if it can be a bit annoying at points. But I'd still argue that it's like a fun game regardless. And also, I'm pretty sure you can turn it off in the settings so you don't have to deal with the cops every single time. And in some ways, there's some, you can like, sometimes there's some points where you can actually easily get through, like, against the cops. But they add a lot of depth to the racing, and I don't know, it just makes the races a lot more dynamic, which is pretty nice. Also, I just kind of want to take a note and say that this game, for a 1998 game, looks pretty good. This game has aged pretty well for a game that came out in 1998. Honestly, it looks like a game that was made 5, 6, 7 years after. I'm not even joking. It actually kind of surprised me how damn good of a game this looked for the time period they came out. So, again, racing games have always looked good. So, which is interesting to me. Which, well, speaking of racing, we got F-Zero X, the sequel to F-Zero on the Super Nintendo. This was released on the N64, obviously. And this game, well, just basically provides a 3D version of what they had on the Super Nintendo, and I think it was pretty decent. Again, N64 is not my favorite console, but it's the game. The games themselves were fun. It's just I don't like that damn controller. Thankfully, this game just controls like a normal game, so you don't have to really worry about using the analog unless you really want to. And I think that works in its favor. So, yeah, no, I gotta give a lot of props to F-Zero X for being a decent racing game for the N64. Yeah. And last but not least, we got ourselves the first Soul Calibur game, which, I mean, you guys know my personal favorite fighting game series has always been Soul Calibur. I just have always preferred that style of gameplay compared to something like a Tekken or Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. I just like the idea of, blade to blade combat as opposed to fist to fist. It just kind of feels more, I don't want to say realistic, because obviously this is not a realistic game at all. It just feels more, it just makes a lot of sense. At least for the type of game this is supposed to be. Because, well, it feels more like a duel. And I like that. I like duels. Duels are cool. Well, not in real life. Don't duel in real life. That's terrible. But dueling in games, I think that's pretty cool. So, and, well, this game, funny enough, is technically not even the first game in the Soul Calibur series. So, the fact that I was able to, like, update a lot of the problems, like, fix some of the problems of the previous game, I gotta give it credit. So, let's go over the winner. So, the award... Oh, shoot. Oh, sorry, I got a DM. So, the award for the best sports racing fighting game of all time goes to, or not of all time, I'm sorry, I was reading a DM. The best sports racing fighting game of 1998 goes to Soul Calibur. Yeah, I think this game's pretty fun. Even for a 3D, like an early 3D fighting game, I think this game is actually pretty fantastic. And again, also, similar to Need for Speed 3, looks ahead of its time. Granted, keep in mind this was originally released on arcade machines and was ported over to other consoles, but it was still pretty cool. And it was a massive needed change for Namco at the time. Because, well, like I said, this is technically not the first Soul Calibur game. That honor goes to Soul Edge. But it's a complete overhaul in every single way, as Soul Edge... Okay, it wasn't terrible, but it was very clunky. It was very... It was basically just like a beta test for what this game would eventually become. And I think it was definitely for the better. The change, like the button layout change, I think was a lot more like user-friendly with this. And even some of the mechanics that were in this game that were pretty damn big made this a lot more easier to get into. So this game added a guard mechanic, which is common in a lot of fighter games now. And while yes, guarding mechanics were a thing, I'm pretty sure Mortal Kombat technically had a guarding mechanic. It wasn't really efficient to use. This game made it a lot more efficient to use. And it makes it to where it's a lot more fair when you actually guard or block enemy attacks. Which then gives us into the forgiveness mechanic, which basically goes like this. So in a lot of fighting games before Soul Calibur, let's just say a lot of bullshit happened. And it's the reason why I just could not get into any other fighting game except for this series here. It's the fact that even if you were already down on the floor, enemies could still hit you basically stun locking you to the point where you cannot attack, and, well, resulting in some of the most frustrating, fights in any game. It is the reason why I just could not get into things like Street Fighter. It is the reason why I can't get into things like Mortal Kombat as much. But Soul Calibur, that is one of the things that made it stand out, and it made it a lot easier for people to get into. And as a result, it's a lot more noob friendly. And I think that's awesome, especially for an upcoming franchise like this. You need to have like a game to get a new player base invested. And, well, Soul Calibur did that. And I have to be frank, that's awesome. So, yeah, Soul Calibur, easily the winner. I know I could have given the win to Need for Speed 3, but I'm gonna be honest, I've already given Need for Speed a lot of attention. I kind of want to at least give it to something else. So, yeah, pretty great fighting game, and created a pretty good franchise. All right, best expansion. This was kind of a hard one to kind of choose because, well, similar to the strategy and RPG categories, this year was just kind of mid for expansions. It wasn't a terrible year for expansions, but I can only have found just enough here. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm not entirely in love with any of what we're about to talk about. So, yeah. Decent games where they came from. Not denying that. But definitely not what I would consider to be some GOAT expansions. Excuse me. Or like great, added content. Or at least in my personal opinion. Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith, for example, is a weird expansion. So this is the expansion to Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. And it pretty much, in some ways, it feels like a different game. Like, I mean, it doesn't use the full motion cutscenes that the base game has. It uses completely in-game cutscenes, which is kind of bizarre. Also, this game was a lot more focused on the lightsaber combat than it was the shooting. Which, I mean, that was kind of the appeal of the Jedi Knight games, is that you got to use both you got to use both blasters and a lightsaber, which is like, whoa. But it does kind of compromise the vision on this being a first-person shooter or third-person shooter, depending on what camera position you're using. And I don't know, I just felt like some of the levels and the bosses were just a lot more frustrating in this than they were in the base game. And the base game already had some fucking bullshit in it. If you guys know, you know. But yeah, it's fine. What it did add was cool, though. Like, I like the locales. Some of the enemies were pretty cool. It's got some problems. And I can say the same thing with Quake 2 The Reckoning, which, funny enough, I streamed this back in 2022. And, I mean, it's Quake 2. I like Quake 2. It added in some pretty good locale variety that I thought was pretty cool with this game. It had some swamp areas, which looked nice. Some of the new rodent enemies looked cool as well. But, like, it can feel like a drag, if you know what I mean. And then we got Total Annihilation. I think it's It's the cum contingent. I don't know what that's supposed to say. I hope that's... Or the core. God, okay. That makes a lot more sense. Hold on, let me... God, I don't... It just looked different on the screen. Okay, it's core. I'm so sorry about that. Okay. Core. And I guess I can also say the same thing for the Age of Empires Rise of Rome, is that it's cool new content that adds in new faction, like it adds in new units. And well, in the case of Age of Empires, it added in, 3 new factions. But like that's about it. It's not like the most grandiose expansion pack of all time. And I guess that's just kind of my point, is this was just kind of a weak year for expansion packs, if I'm going to be honest. They're decent expansions. Like, I'm not complaining. And of course, if we didn't have any decent expansion packs on here, this wouldn't even been a category. But keep in mind is that, like, these are not, like, 8 or 9 out of 10 experiences. They're more like between 5, 6, 7 out of 10. So, but of course, as always, we gotta announce a winner. So, the award for the best expansion pack, tentatively at least, because again, it's kind of a weak year for expansions, goes to Quake 2: The Reckoning. So, I think this is I guess the main reason why I think this one is the winner here is not only because I feel like this definitely added in the most meaningful content, but also it was the one that was least frustrating for me. So, as I already mentioned, obviously new levels that's expected with expansion packs that are first-person shooters. But this added in a lot better location variety, because admittedly the base game of Quake 2, you're just in factory after factory after factory, which got repetitive. This at least attempted to branch out a bit of that and added a bit more to the world of Strogas. It added in a lot more different locales that made it feel like a cohesive planet. It didn't just feel like you were just in some, dingy hellhole the whole time. And I like that. And with that, it added in a few new enemies, most of which are just variants of a lot of the main Strogg enemies that you've fought throughout the game. But there's a few new ones. Like I said, there was like a rodent enemy that you fought like in the swamp areas, which is pretty cool. Also, the new weapons that they added in, the Ion Ripper and the Phalanx Cannon, those are pretty nice to use. And, I mean, ultimately, it's more Quake 2 stuff. I like Quake 2, so I think that's ultimately why I just am like, just give it to Quake 2. Just give it to Quake 2. So, but yeah, that's all I gotta really say about that. Alright, art direction. So the visual style of a game. So this is obviously the most subjective part of the awards, but I think these are games that I think people can agree with. Xenogears for its more, mechy, almost clockwork look that it has, which I think is pretty cool. StarCraft for its, environmental storytelling and, pretty cool military sci-fi look that it, clearly inspired, but tried to make its own. Unreal for, honestly, some of the cool, alien designs. I mean, the Scarge, pretty iconic look, and well, the fact that it is still a sci-fi game, but a lot of the buildings are clearly inspired by medieval and Mayan architecture, which I think is a pretty cool look for not Poly, and also the floating islands. The floating islands were a cool bonus. Medieval, for its more goofy gothic look, that was pretty nice. Ocarina of Time, for its 3 version of the unique sort of high fantasy look that it has, and Oddworld Abe's Exodus for its more grim dark approach to its world, and just kind of the cool, just kind of the sense of dread that they try to invoke on the player. So I think these are pretty good choices for art direction. So let's give the winner. So again, this is the most subjective, so if you don't agree, that's fine. But I think people are going to agree with this one regardless. But let's go over. So, the award for the best art direction of 1998 goes to The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Yeah, I like the look of Zelda. It's always been a design that I've always appreciated. So it shouldn't surprise you that Ocarina of Time, of course, won Best Art Direction. Once again, slight spoilers, but there's a reason why. I mean, this obviously has its very unique high fantasy look that definitely takes a lot of... It basically fused a lot of the typical medieval look of stuff and combined it with some more outside cultural influences. Funny enough, I see a lot of imagery that is very reminiscent to stuff like Native American, Mayan, Incan, stuff in this game, as well as some Southeast Asian and sort of like Middle East desert nomad look into it. Like, it's a very, very infused game franchise, and that's something that I really like. It's this specific style of Zelda I'm glad is stuck around, because it's a very unique design philosophy for this particular franchise, and I really like it. And well, it's added to the fact that it is a much more original look, especially for a lot of the races here. I mean, the Garuda, of course, being, or yeah, the Garuda, right? That's what they're called. God damn it. I'm sorry. I'm still new to Zelda lore. So, yeah, Ganon species. So, or Ganondorf. Gerudo. Sorry, that's what they're called. I do apologize. But, like, I like those designs. Like, they're pretty iconic, and it makes it pretty unique. And, well, yeah, even though technically the design philosophy was started with Link to the Past, I definitely do think that this game really solidified the look of Zelda from this point onwards. Because, well, yes, a lot of the, some of the designs that you see here, like the crest, like the shield designs that you see on the, right there, they technically were in Link to the Past. I don't think they really went all out with the design of Zelda as we know it now until Ocarina of Time. And I think that is worth noting. So I gotta give credit where credit is due. So whoever is the art director for the Zelda franchise, you did pretty good. But that then gets us to the final award of the night. Game of the Year. So this is the award that truly matters. So, and, well, this was a tough pill to swallow. Or I guess this was a tough cookie, I should say, because there were a lot of games that came out in 1998 that are easily Game of the Year material. But of course, we could only choose a few. And well, we can only choose up to 6. And I think these are the 6 games that I think deserve this the most. So I know there's going to be some games that people are going to be mad and they're not going to be on here, but this is how I genuinely feel. So I hope you guys at least respect that. So the nominees for Game of the Year are Resident Evil 2, StarCraft, Rainbow Six, Metal Gear Solid, Spyro, and Zelda Ocarina of Time. I don't think there's really any other games that could be nominated other than these 6. Of course, Resident Evil 2 being the game that really did take the Resident Evil franchise up to, high speed and is a big cultural influence for a lot of horror games. StarCraft, of course, starting the StarCraft franchise, having a lot of immersive landscapes, and for, having a pretty good story for a RTS. Rainbow Six for the massive gaming innovations in the first-person shooter franchise that it implemented. Metal Gear Solid, of course, for popularizing stealth and, well, revitalizing the Metal Gear name for, a wider audience. Spyro for being a pretty damn good little platformer experience for the PlayStation 1. And Zelda Ocarina of Time for, many reasons that other people have talked about. So, and I think people are going to agree with this, and it's a very, very close, very, very close, choice between all of these games. You could make an argument for any of the games that are on here to be Game of the Year, and I wouldn't actually disagree. But let's actually choose the winner. Because if you guys have noticed a pattern, well, if you guys know the pattern, you can probably deduce on what's going to win. So, it's about time that we give out the final award. So, here we go. The award for Game of the Year of 1998 goes to Metal Gear Solid. Yep. Metal Gear Solid wins. In my opinion, is the best game to represent 1998. Without a shadow of a doubt in my mind. So, that's not to disrespect Legend of Zelda, because, or Ocarina of Time specifically, because I know a lot of people would probably say that that is Game of the Year. But I, in my opinion, think that Metal Gear Solid really does deserve that in a lot of ways. We played it last year, and of course we're currently going through Metal Gear Solid 2, which, that's the sequel, but as far as the first game here, again, this is technically not the first Metal Gear game, but this was the first game that people really attached themselves to, and, well, for good reason. So, and, well, this game was innovative in its own right, because this game had a lot of cool moments, specifically in the fact that, specifically for how it was shot, because this game had some very cinematic gameplay and cutscenes. It honestly did feel like not only was I watching, but interacting with a movie itself. I don't know how to describe it, but it really was one of the first games to have that tie-in of its narrative with cinematography with gameplay. It may have not been the first, but it was definitely the game that really put that out to the mainstream. and showcased that, yeah, no, you can make, a compelling narrative. Like, you can make a game equivalent to that of an actual cinematic feature. And I think that was awesome. I will say this game can be a bit difficult, but it's also kind of forgiving at the same time. Because, I mean, this is a stealth game, so you primarily sneak around enemies and making sure that you take them out without them knowing. Though there are sections where you have to go guns blazing, or you do have to use alternative methods, but they still feel natural. I mean, yeah, there are it can be a bit weird for newcomers to come into this, maybe not expecting what the type of gameplay it's going to be, but you can pick it up fairly quickly, especially since there is a built-in training mode within the game itself, which is, obviously much, not, I wouldn't say needed, but definitely much appreciated for sure. And, well, this is the game that popularized the stealth genre as a whole. It may have not been the first stealth game. Hell, this wasn't even the first stealth game released in 1998. But it was definitely the game that I feel like inspired a whole generation of stealth games to come out within the next 10 years of this game's life, like after this game came out. It is that important. So you gotta at least give props to that. And, well, going back to the narrative, this narrative was honestly pretty compelling. Just, obviously, it didn't, like, justify the antagonists that you're going against, but it humanized them in a way in which you understand where they were coming from, and a lot of the emotional baggage that they dealt with. It was one of the first games, at least in my opinion, that really did blur the line and flesh out its villains. And I think that was awesome. Going up against Revolver Ocelot and his, crew of baddies was honestly some of the most engaged I was with a game. So that was pretty cool. And, well, it's because of all that. I have to agree with people. This is one of the greatest games of all time. Like, it is easily one of the best games, not only on the PlayStation 1, and also technically PC, since this had a PC release initially. Or, not initially, but a few years after. It's honestly one of the best games that have ever been made, and one of the most important games, period. And so, yeah, no. Solid Snake. You did good, Snake. And, well, Hideo Kojima, you are, in fact, a legendary, game director for a reason. And this game proved that to the world. So, I have nothing but thanks for you bringing this to our world. So, and I am very excited to finish up Metal Gear Solid 2, because I've been having a lot of fun. It's been kind of iffy in some parts, but I think that game has been pretty fun regardless. So, that of course gets us into the recap for tonight. So, oh shoot, I didn't change the thing. God damn it, I didn't. Hold on, let me add in the best expansion pack, because yes, I do reuse the slides from previous episodes, so makes it easier for me to work on this. All right, there we go. Should work now. All right, there we go. Oh, yep, there we go. All right, so the best game by a new studio went to Spyro the Dragon. Best action adventure went to Resident Evil 2. Best platformer game went to Crash Bandicoot Warped. Best RPG went to Xenogears. Best shooter game went to Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. Best sim strategy went to StarCraft. Best sports racing fighting game went to Soul Calibur. Best expansion went to Quake 2, The Reckoning. Best art direction went to Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. And, well, the game of the year went to Metal Gear Solid. So, I think I actually am going to change my top 10 favorites before I announce that, because now that I think about it, I think there's one game that I think I'm starting to realize I actually like. So, don't worry, it'll be quick. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. All right. So, which of course gets us into the bonus round. So, my personal favorite years or games of the year, which one of them people are gonna make fun of me for, but rest assured, I like the game, but whatever. Okay, top 10 favorites of 1998. Resident Evil 2, Metal Gear Solid, Zelda Ocarina of Time, Thief Dark Project, Spyro the Dragon, Unreal, Rainbow Six, Soul Calibur, StarCraft. And I will admit, I like Half-Life 1, I just think it's overrated. So, because you can like a game and still think that it's overrated. So, which, yes, I guess that just proves that, like, I've grown to like the game, but god damn it, stop. Whatever. I just don't like when people jerk off to this game all the time. So, it's a good game, it just is deeply flawed. So, that's like number 10 here, I'd say. So, shut up. So, anyways, let's go over the guilty pleasures and honorable mentions, which there's actually quite a few, but keep in mind, not necessarily big names. So that's why, or there's some big names on here, but you know, it is what it is. So, all right, let's start with the joke games. So, these two are definitely guilty pleasures. No One Can Stop Mr. Domino and Irritating Stick. Those games are dumb. Those are definitely not honorable mentions. Those are just guilty pleasures. They're troll games that I think are funny. That were on the PlayStation 1. Like, these, like, Irritating Stick especially got negative reviews. It's just, I just find it funny. It's frustrating as fuck, but it's funny. So, guilty pleasure for sure. Now let's talk about the actual honorable mentions. So, Panzer Dragoon Saga. The only Sega Saturn game I think that's on here, from this year at least. Basically just an RPG for Panzer Dragoon, which is pretty cool. Tenchu, Stealth Assassins, another stealth game. Actually predates Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1. Actually pretty cool. Star Wars Rebellion, which is a grand strategy Star Wars game from 1998, which helped birth the Star Wars Rebellion tabletop game, which is pretty nice. I think that game is pretty cool, even if you need a guide, which is a matter of fact. Where is it? God damn it, where is it? Shit, I don't remember where it is on the shelf. Is it in there? No. Is it up here? Oh, there it is. Yes, I have the official strategy guide that originally came with this, because my cousins actually owned this, and they gave this to me. Thank you guys, by the way. Because, well, they don't own the game anymore, but I have the game on Steam, so yeah, it's a lot. So I haven't played the game in a while, but this thing actually does help. So, and I'm very glad that this thing is still intact as it was, 26 years later. So, and I will make sure that it keeps being like that for sure. So, see, I used the bookshelf. Anyways, also I wanted to give a shout out to, funny enough, the only Japanese exclusive game that's on here, but also randomly enough, a Super Nintendo game? Super Famicom Wars. Yes, this was a Japanese exclusive Super Nintendo game released in 1998, which you would think that would be a red flag, but no. Because, well, this is actually a precursor to Advance Wars. Yes. This is in the same franchise. So if you guys can find like an English translation of this game somewhere, go check it out. It's actually really fun. So yeah. XCOM Interceptor we also got up here. Just more of a it's more of a sim strategy hybrid game for XCOM. It's interesting. Police SWAT 2 being more of again another real-time tactics game. So, which of course you guys know SWAT 3 and 4. I really like SWAT 4, but you know, different genre, but still cool. Delta Force, another tactical shooter from around this time that is pretty big as far as that genre is concerned, though can feel a bit dated. I still like it though. The Settlers 3, of course, continuing off the legacy of the Settlers series from that back then, which was a cool sort of simulation. Heretic 2, changing it from being a first-person shooter to an action-adventure game, which was alright. Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate being more of a traditional XCOM style of game, which we've talked about its sequel in our 2022 thing. Slight spoiler, so if you guys want to check that out, feel free to do so. Star Wars Rogue Squadron, which I was gonna nominate this, but then I questioned where should I put it, because it's not exactly a flight sim like the X-Wing games, but it's not a traditional action-adventure game, because it's still a vehicular combat game. I still wanted to at least give it an honorable mention. So that might probably be the biggest snub for me personally on here, but I still like it. And then last but not least, we got the Quest for Glory 5, which was an RPG series from the 90s that I thought was pretty decent going back to. So, but yeah, that concludes the Caspian Game Awards for 1998. So, goddamn. So, of course, we will be doing 1997 later. I think I'll be doing it on Sunday, because Saturday we're going to be doing a tier list. So, make sure you guys, stay tuned for that. And as I already said at the very beginning, I will be doing the Game Awards, like once we're done with the 90s. We're not going to do the 70s or 80s. That's just way too early for us. We might do the first half of the 90s. It just depends if you guys are interested or if any of my friends want to hear about that. But as far as the series, even if we get done with either 1995 or we go all the way up to 1990, just kind of depends. We will be doing the 2024 Game Awards once we're done with all that, and pretty much from this point onwards, if I'm still doing Twitch, I'll still be doing the Caspian Game Awards for every single year. 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028. It just depends on if I'm still here or not. But I'm excited for that. So, and I hope you guys did enjoy tonight's stream. If you guys did, of course, hit the follow button down below. I would greatly appreciate it if you did, because we're just one more follower behind our goal. So if you guys can, that would be fantastic. And if you guys can, of course, check out the links down below, specifically the Discord and the SoundCloud. And of course, if you're watching this on Twitch still, check out the YouTube link. So, and of course, if you guys can, and you want to directly support me, hit that subscribe button if you're watching this on Twitch. If you can't necessarily do that, that's completely fine. I'm so glad that you guys took time to watch this. But regardless of all that, though, make sure to share the stream to other people as well, and consider to be awesome people in the process. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good night. and peace out. Bye.